It does not look like there is any way to stop what is expected to be a very big win here for Democrats. And I know you're opposed to it, but I want to press you on that, because isn't expanding Medicare access good for a state like yours, which has more residents reliant on the Affordable Care Act than any other state? And Republicans like reducing the deficit. The CBO says this will reduce it by $100 billion over the next decade. Isn't there some good stuff in here for you, too?
So, Margaret, here's the way I look at it. Right now, this bill actually ought to be called the War on Seniors Act. I mean, this is a war on Medicare. You look at this. This is a $280 billion cut in Medicare. So what's going to happen is Medicare is going to get cut, and there's going to be seniors that don't get life-saving drugs because the pharmaceutical industries will not be able to have to.
Reducing Medicare costs is not the same as reducing benefits, though. You know that.
Margaret, it's $280 billion that would have been spent. It was anticipated to be spent. It's not going to be spent now. And the drug companies that would be doing more research are not going to be able to spend the money on research. There will be life-saving drugs that seniors will not get. On top of that, I mean, they're going to raise taxes by over $700 billion. And let's remember, companies don't end up paying the taxes. Shareholders paying the taxes. Lower income for the employees pay the taxes. Less investment pays the taxes. So this $700 billion is actually going to hurt the economy. And then while gas prices are at $2 more than they were when Joe Biden took office, there's an excise tax on gas. So why would you, we're in a recession. Why would you be increasing the cost of government, increasing taxes?
So yes. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget called your claim there that you just reiterated in terms of Medicare spending completely misleading. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that just about 1% of new drugs would be affected by the changes there on drug development. So how do you respond to that?
Wait a minute. What if it's your grandmother? Is not 1% important? If it impacts a life-saving drug that we could do now, we shouldn't be cutting Medicare like this. I don't believe it.
Okay, so I've heard a lot of bad faith arguments before. A lot. But I can promise you that pretending that allowing Medicare to negotiate lower drug prices so that Americans have lower medical costs is equivalent to simply cutting Medicare may actually be the single most disingenuous argument I've ever heard. So here's the deal. Rick Scott, along with a bunch of other Republicans, are claiming that the Inflation Reduction Act is going to strip $300 billion from Medicare. In reality, the Inflation Reduction Act, which just passed the Senate, will allow Medicare to negotiate lower drug prices, meaning that because Medicare will be leveraging its weight to negotiate those lower drug prices, the government would save almost $300 billion for the same amount of medicine. In other words, Medicare recipients receive the exact same amount of drugs, but because Medicare negotiated lower prices from drug companies, that $300 billion is savings for taxpayers. To make this crystal clear, same exact benefits for a lower price. Period. By pretending that Medicare is losing $300 billion is not just an outright lie, but it's actually carrying water for the very drug companies that are screwing over the U.S. taxpayers and Medicare recipients in the first place. In other words, Rick Scott is pretending that he's some hero here defending the sanctity of Medicare, when all he's doing is trying to block Medicare from being able to actually use its economies of scale to get a better deal for its recipients. There are a lot of garbage people in government, but someone who would tell a lie so diametrically opposed to reality, so shameless, so in bed with big business, and so antithetical to what's best for U.S. taxpayers is on a whole other level of shittiness. And beyond that, I should note that not only would the Inflation Reduction Act not strip Medicare of $300 billion, but according to the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, a group that PolitiFact notes has been skeptical of Biden's legislative efforts, citing their cost, wrote, quote, "In reality, the bill's prescription drug savings would save the federal government nearly $300 billion through 2031 without cutting benefits." It went on to say, quote, "Lowering Medicare costs is not the same as reducing benefits. Quite the opposite. Many measures to reduce costs for the government would reduce costs for individuals as well." The committee explained that Medicare beneficiaries would see decreases in premiums and out-of-pocket costs, including through a $2,000 annual cap on out-of-pocket costs, ultimately amounting to a savings of another $300 billion on top of the $300 billion already saved. But sure, Rick Scott, somehow $600 billion in cumulative savings for Medicare beneficiaries is a bad thing. Got it. Now, you might ask yourself, What kind of person would try to screw over Medicare recipients? Have I got a story for you, because it just so happens that Rick Scott himself personally oversaw the largest Medicare fraud in U.S. history at the time when, as CEO of Columbia HCA Hospital, his company billed Medicare, Medicaid, and other federal programs for tests that were never ordered, attached false diagnosis codes to patient records to increase reimbursements to the hospitals, claimed non-reimbursable advertising costs as community education, and billed the government for home visits to patients that didn't qualify to receive them. The hospital company was fined a staggering $1.7 billion, which was, at that point, the largest healthcare fraud fine ever levied by the Justice Department. And Rick Scott, trying to escape accountability, resigned as CEO fewer than 4 months after the investigation became public. So when he pretends to care about the integrity of these programs, just remember that he already undermined those programs once. He already stole money from Medicare and Medicaid, programs that service the elderly, the poor, the disabled, and the sick, so that he could line his pockets as the CEO. That is who Rick Scott is. Which is probably why, if Rick Scott had his way and gets the Republican Senate majority that he's trying to as chair of the NRSC, he's made it his priority that Republicans would pass legislation sunsetting all federal programs after 5 years, which means that Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security would be as good as gone. Remember, these are programs that Republicans have been threatening to torpedo for decades, and now Rick Scott has introduced a vehicle for them to do exactly that. So if you're of the 40% of Americans who use Medicare or Medicaid, or have family members who do, then make sure you are well aware that if you vote for Republicans to control the U.S. Senate in November, you are voting to eliminate Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security by the end of the decade. And finally, not to bring sand to the beach here, but just one more clip that I think does a pretty good job at exposing the shameless hypocrisy of Rick Scott, most recently while speaking at CPAC.
Everyone will obey, and no one will be allowed to complain. If you do speak up, boom, you're going to be canceled. Your views, if you don't conform with big tech, Fauci, or Neil Young, you're going to be taken off Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. The militant left in America are the modern-day version of book burners.
The left is the modern-day version of book burners. And if you think that seems like a strange thing for a Republican to say, you'd be right, because Republicans across the country have quite literally been banning books on race and LGBT issues. So it's a tad bit misleading to suggest that Democrats are akin to modern-day book burners when Rick Scott is part of a political party that is literally modern-day book burners. And look, we could do this all day, but I think the point is clear. Rick Scott isn't interested in the truth any more than he's interested in saving any American's money. Rick Scott is solely interested in protecting the moneyed interests that serve his campaign. And if that means that he'll lie directly to your faces to preserve that system, then that is very clearly exactly what he's going to do. Before you go, couple things. First, if you want to support my work, the best way is to subscribe to this channel. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. And second, if you want to see and hear more from me, check out my website, briantylercohen.com. That way you can get links to my podcast, merchandise, ways to donate to voting rights organizations, and so much more. The thumbnail is also right here on the screen, so go check it out. And as always, thank you so much for watching.